Anything said on Hillbilly Broadcast should be taken only as opinion. Also, the views and opinions expressed by guests of the program that we interview do not necessarily reflect the views of the hosts of Hillbilly Broadcasts or its advertisers.
Please remain calm. There is no need for alarm. This space is now being taken over by Hillbilly Broadcast.
All right, so some of you might have noticed there was a pretty big thing that happened in the country here. Several people's in the morning. I've thought about shaving my head as well. And what I'm referencing to is Joey Logano just won the NASCAR championship tonight. He did. Just a few minutes before we started recording, Logano pulled it off again.
Yeah, it's no business being in.
Amen. I was screaming at my, not TV.
Your monitor.
My monitor. Yeah.
Screaming at his monitor. Yeah. Yeah.
Nice save there, Brian.
Yeah, geez, you wouldn't. What round?
Nice way to roll it into the closet, Brian.
Rolled it right in the closet. Ben, what round was that Logano was supposed to be out? Was it? He wasn't supposed to make it to the round of 8, right?
Yeah, because Alex Bowman was in, and Logano was 9. And then Bowman's car didn't pass inspection, so Logano snuck in.
Failed.
That's so jacked up. Larson's got the most wins. He wasn't even in there to compete. Logano backed in, and then he's the champion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Larson got 6 wins on the season. The closest number, I think, is 3. There's 2 guys got 3, and Larson didn't make it in. And yes, we have Alex Bowman to thank for being, I think, 17 pounds light in post-race inspection for the round of 8. So, yeah. All right. Anyways, now on to more trivial matters. We got
right.
We got quite the crew here today. We got, of course, Ben, the ever faithful co-host. We got Brian Wells of IHC Report fame making his second appearance here, and of course we got the Catholic advisor. We got Glen Asbury.
Hey.
And we have a new face. You go by Al or Alfred?
Al.
Yeah. We got Al Wayman, and you're somehow tied in with Brian, right?
Yeah, he's my brother-in-law, even though I try to not admit it sometimes.
I'm the best brother-in-law he's got.
Be the only one.
That's why I was somehow suspect.
He makes me clean the chicken coop every time I come to visit, so I try to show up.
Jeez, Brian.
You know?
Well, tell me this, Al. Were you involved in any of this IHC Report stuff that he talked about?
Back in the day, he was using my computer to type it all out, and I did some anonymous comments because at the time I was just coming out of the movement myself and was a very angry until I realized I was a anti-fundamentalist, and then I had to tone it down. But I remember those times. Those were good times.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I really.
So
enjoyed
you
those
were
stories.
an accessory to the crime, then, Al.
Yeah, I knew it was going down. Yeah. Yep.
So we'll just say he was my biggest cheerleader. Just thank God we didn't see him in a little cheerleader outfit.
Yeah.
Thanks for that mental image, Brian. What a way to start.
So I kind of got a harebrained idea. Me and Ben and Glenn were all on a group text thread during election night, and then for some time afterwards. And I got the idea of, hey, we need to try to reach out to Brian. Brian's a libertarian, and then we got to talking. Hey, and I think Brian asked me as well. I was like, you need somebody that votes Democrat? And I said, well, yeah, I don't really know who would want to come on. And he brought up Al. So we've got a Democrat voter. We've got Glenn, who's Glenn. You're pretty conservative, right?
You could say that.
You could say that.
Yes.
And then
I remember back when I first started my Facebook page, I said conservative first, Republican second. Now I don't think I'd even bother putting the Republican part on there. But yeah. What else are you going to do?
So we got three viewpoints here to discuss some of this election stuff and kind of maybe do a little bit of a post-mortem. Brian, I will tell you that I voted for my first Libertarian this time around. I was first time ever.
Yeah, Brian, you're making inroads, Brian. That's how it starts.
Just one at a time. Jesus, one at a time.
That's two at a time, sir.
Woo!
Yeah. Well, Ben jumped in too.
I voted for the Libertarian candidate for governor 4 years ago, Brian, but not this time. So did I backslide, I guess?
As a Catholic, you can't backslide, but go down to the priest and confess and we'll be good.
Yeah, we had Erica Kalinich on, who was a Libertarian candidate for governor, and I wound up voting for her. I liked a lot of what she had to say. And I think as I get older, I'm identifying more and more with Libertarian viewpoints and such. But Al, let's start with you, bud, because somebody of your persuasion is we don't have them on very often, so we need to use you while I got you.
So I am almost like this close to being Libertarian because I hate money in politics and I hate big government. And the reason why I believe Harris lost is because she started talking. She sent Mark Cuban out. Early on, she was saying everything I liked. She got a good start. She was talking about the little guy, minimum wage, all that kind of stuff, paid family leave, things like that. Then she, for some reason, went and got Mark Cuban to send everybody out saying, hey, nothing's going to change from the Biden administration. He was already down like 18 points. Probably, so she was making ground starting out, but then it just threw the whole thing. So money in politics, she ended up having $1 billion from all our corporate donors and lost. This is the second time they lost. But the reason why I vote Democratic progressive every time is because I will not support evangelical policies in government. When I left CHM, they were very heavily into
Christian nationalism,
government and Christian nationalism and things like that. I can't do that. And one of the things we grew up with too, and probably you, Phil, through the 80s, the moral majority and ideas like that, Newt Gingrich, and then the Bush years, all that. It didn't seem to me that if I'm leaving a belief system that was restrictive as CHM, why would I go and vote for it in government?
I see. So what?
No way. I cannot do it.
Sure.
And so maybe I can go Libertarian because evangelical support isn't there. But all the people who don't like evangelical Republicans say they're Libertarian to not feel as bad when they're voting. So I need more of a choice. That's true. I hate money in politics. I hate big government, but I cannot vote in evangelical Christian fundamentalism in government.
So when you say, let's delve in a little bit deeper. So maybe elaborate a little bit more on that, what it is that bothers you about it, and so on and so forth.
Because I think that when we were in the restrictive movement, and I listened to your last 2 episodes. The first one was with Breen. I think that's how you say it.
Yes.
Breen, about people coming out of and her assisting them and talking about the different groups and how restrictive things are and their ideas, and helping them. And then the next episode, you and I think Ben were on talking about the election and things like that, coming up to the election. Then I think that like where we come from in the belief system doesn't translate over into politics very well, because we're still just as restrictive when we come out of the belief system and go into politics. We're still voting the way the preacher taught us.
I see.
Why is that? Like when I did the apprenticeship in the pottery, I went from going from mom and dad's place, we were in CHM at that time. I went to live at an all women's pottery and did my apprenticeship with lesbian women.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I got that whole thing, and I was introduced to a whole thing I was not used to. However, being that everything was so restrictive, I could identify because, Phil, when you said you went back to visit that one church in your episode, how uncomfortable you felt.
Very, yes.
There are people who we make feel uncomfortable in politics who cannot vote the way we do, even though we want their vote. Because behind the scenes, we're making them feel all uncomfortable. I don't care. I'm not gay. I'm straight, whatever. I may not support that kind of thing, but I'm not going to throw away their vote. It's almost like we're trying to intentionally lose elections by leaving people out. If we want to open it up, we need to, here it is, be more inclusive. Just like us going to church, we wish that they would do all these different things, but it's not translating to them. So when I come back and I'm going to vote Trump Republican or whatever party, I feel uncomfortable sitting in that church because I'm voting for the very policies that I was so much used to restricting myself.
I see.
So there is no way I'm going to ever cast my vote if I know that evangelicals are backing the Republican Party. No way. Mike Johnson, as a terrible Speaker of the House. Why would they do that? He's sitting up there praying. Why am I going to vote in a preacher of the group that I just left? Because I'm going to get more of that, but in government policy. Here in PA, I can't even buy beer on Sunday because we got blue laws. Because the Lord made a law that I can't go buy beer on Sunday. I'm a Democrat that owns a gun. I can't hunt on Sunday because in PA, the Lord said that I can't. So, there is no way I'm going to ever cast a vote for a Republican that's backed by evangelicals.
So I think I'm getting some of what you're saying, and this sounds like you were talking about being that far from being libertarian. It sounds like you're a whole lot of just kind of live and let live. You don't like the policies like that Republicans have been famous for over the years of restricting gay marriage and things like that. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yeah, because what my neighbor does, why should I care? He's not bothering me. He's not telling me that I can't go to a church if I want to. He's not telling me that, but I'm telling him he can't be happy in life and maybe the only life he has.
Glenn, let me go to you because I've thought a lot about this kind of thing over the past several years, especially since I forget the Supreme Court decision on gay marriage, and I've thought that this is just me when I'm sitting and hashing stuff out. Part of me does feel like, how do I want to say this? So like some empathy as far as, look, there's a lot of things that are legal that I think are sinful, and people like it's completely legal to go get hammered drunk. Well, I think that's morally that's wrong. So, what's your thoughts on that? As far as, do you think there's some kind of value to the argument of the live and let live type of thing that Republicans have not been as much into in the past?
So I haven't even known Al prior to tonight, so it's my first time getting acquainted with him. I wish I'd have been taking notes, which I wasn't doing while he was talking, because he said a lot, and I think he said it pretty well. He said some things, though, that I don't agree with. He did say some things that I do agree with also. I guess I'll lead with this. This would be the biggest difference I would have with what Al said, and from where he kind of launched as a springboard. Our differences do begin pretty early on, and so here's what I would just lay down as a marker. There's no such thing as a morally neutral public square. And the vantage point that Al is coming from, the construct that is there seems to presuppose that there is. And a complete live and let live environment to some extent, to some people, it sounds good in theory, but it doesn't work. Somebody's values are going to win out at the end of the day. And I'd rather they be mine than somebody else's. That's diametrically opposed to mine.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I think that
Sure.
maybe you're misunderstanding. I'm not saying it's going to be a free for all. I'm all for doing Matthew 25. I'm all for you shouldn't steal, you shouldn't, so 10 commandments, sure. There needs to be some.
So what you're talking about is also a libertarian principle that I do think has a lot of value, the non-aggression principle, right?
Yeah,
actually, yeah, right. Maybe not completely, probably not as much as maybe where Brian would land. I'll let Brian speak for himself. I think when it comes to fighting unnecessary wars, maybe we'll develop that thought a little bit later as we go on tonight. I imagine all five of us might kind of be on the same page when it comes to that. Maybe Al is even, if he's finding any silver lining in the Trump win, maybe it would be that. That we're not, I fully believe we're not going to have any more unnecessary wars being started. That was one piece. I'm going to kind of free range here. That was one piece that Al mentioned as far as the background that he came out of and what he feels like he's speaking against. That I agree where I wouldn't have always. I'll briefly share a little bit about my journey. I grew up in a home where we were we were in the conservative holiness movement and a very strict sector of it. I've told that story elsewhere. My parents were so apolitical to the point that they didn't even vote. And when I was 12 or 13, it was just like it exploded for me, this interest in politics, and it's never really died ever since then. It's kind of like a virus I can't shake, even though sometimes I want to. Maybe you all understand that too.
100%.
Say that again.
100%.
Yeah. Okay. So I came of political age in the presidency of Ronald Reagan, and I just idolized him. Still do, really, in a lot of ways. I look back and I see some mistakes that I think were made during his administration that I wouldn't have always looked at that way. But he did the big things right. He led the way to lower taxes and regulation and prosperity like our country hadn't seen in a long, long time. And he paved the way for the fall of the Soviet Union, which was huge. So I kind of was a default Republican, I guess you could say, all through the 90s, and was a very, very enthusiastic George W. Bush supporter.
Oh, yeah, me too.
So, I was a typical, I guess you could say, neocon. I was talking to Ben about this the other day. One thread that I can see looking back, trying to tell the concise version of this, one thread that I can see looking back into the 2000s even is that I was always intrigued by the writings and the philosophy of Pat Buchanan. And you could probably credit the fact that I eventually became a fan after I voted for Donald Trump the first time. I became a big fan of what he was doing and also became a Catholic. A lot of that traces back to Pat Buchanan because he was a Catholic populist, anti-globalist candidate. And the populism and the opposition to globalist control, that's what resonates with me about Donald Trump today and why I'm thrilled that he won. I suppose this isn't surprising, but I'll end with this. I think Al tends to view Kamala Harris quite a lot more benevolently than I do. I think she's the most vacuous political candidate we've had come along on the national stage, certainly in my lifetime. And I was born in 1975. So I was happy for that reason to see her lose also. But that's probably enough about my background. I don't know. I'm sure I could flesh out more the whole idea of values in politics and all of that. I just think some ones are going to prevail, and that's how laws are made. And I guess I would say this: I empathize, Al, with a lot of what you said as far as pushback towards, such a, how to put this, such a tight-fisted, ratcheted up control, right? But also, good and evil and right and wrong are genuine forces that operate in our society and in the world. And I think that bleeds over into politics, whether we want to admit it or not. And I'm not saying you're not admitting it by any means. That's just where I'm at, and it certainly informs who I vote for and what causes matter the most to me. So that's enough from me for the moment. I'll yield the floor to whoever you want to toss it to next, Bill.
Well, let me get it to. Let's get up here to Brian, the Libertarian. What's your thoughts on this whole thing, Brian?
All right, get ready for this as the Libertarian expound. No, I always like to say that I'm a recovering Republican, and I'll always be a recovering Republican because I grew up as you guys did in the conservative holiness movement, and I don't know where I picked it up, but along the way, it was kind of like republicanism and godliness went hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
I remember as a kid, the first time I ran across somebody who was a Democrat. He could not stand Ronald Reagan. Unlike Glenn, he hated Ronald Reagan. He thought he was an evil man. And I remember I was probably 10 or 11 years old at the time. And I remember thinking, how in the world can this guy be a Christian and go to heaven? And as some of you saw, we had a bit of an intense debate about that on Culture Breakers. But
was it about that?
Get a little heated over there.
Yeah, and so I remember growing up. Again, there was kind of like this: if you were a Republican, if you were a Christian, you had to vote Republican. You had to be a Republican. And so I kind of went into my political, I guess, active, voting, and really becoming very politically active. When I was at GBS, I was a student council president. There's a fountain in the middle of GBS that is there because I helped organize a bunch of students to go down and canvass for Charlie Winburn, who's running for city council, and he provided us with a donation, and that donation went to put in that fountain.
Wow.
I actually went out and went door to door knocking for George Bush, and so I was very, very heavily drinking the Republican Kool-Aid until 2008. And 2008 is kind of where, for me, my eyes started opening. And it really wasn't the Ron Paul revolution, even though that was a big thing in 2008. Mm-hmm. But it really wasn't that for me at all. It was that I began to really see John McCain as, and I've come to really even further see him not as a war hero, but a war criminal. And I will believe that with every fiber of my being until the day I die, unless somebody can provide me with documentation otherwise. That man was a war criminal, and the fact that the Republicans put him up really started to put a sour taste in my mouth. But I still was very much fearful of Obama at that point. I remember when Obama won. I believe I felt very much like people felt this past Tuesday when Trump won.
Yeah.
I was very fearful. I was very angry. I just all of the feelings. And at the time, we were going to a church where the pastor, I don't know if he was registered Democrat, but he certainly voted Democrat, leaned very Democrat. His wife did as well. And I had some very frank conversations with them. And through that, I came to understand that, you can be a Christian and hold other political views. And whether that's Democrat, Libertarian, whatever, not everybody needed to see the world through the Republican lens. And so kind of fast forward to the next election, and at this point, I was fully aboard the Ron Paul bandwagon. And I went and voted for Ron Paul in the primary, and it was the first time in my life where I felt like I was voting for a candidate. Up to that point, I never felt like I had ever voted for a candidate at any level. I always felt like I was voting against somebody. I was voting for the lesser of the two evils. And then the Republican Party, in my opinion, did Ron Paul wrong. And they put forth Romney. And
Romney.
a wretched, horrible candidate. Not as bad as Harris. I don't think anybody will ever be at that level of just incompetent. There was just nothing there. But that's getting ahead of the story. I went down. I plugged my nose. I voted for Mitt Romney, and the very next day, I registered Libertarian. And a big part of it came down to some of what Al was talking about, because at that point, I'd really come to believe that the Republicans loved big government as long as it benefited them. The Republicans loved making laws as long as it benefited them. And I just became very, very tired of that level of hypocrisy, where I felt like they would talk small market, they would talk free markets and small government, and then they couldn't spend fast enough as soon as they got into power.
Yeah.
They would talk about being pro-life, but in my opinion, they were pro-birth, and they also loved war. They were the biggest warmongers ever. And I just couldn't put all of that together in my mind to where I could say, this is okay. But for me to go register Democrat, that was a bridge too far, because I certainly couldn't buy into a lot of the things that the Democrats got behind. And so when I ran across the non-aggression principle, that really sold it for me. And it's really simple. Don't hurt other people and don't take their stuff. And I'm like, if that isn't, the Great Commandment really summed up politically, what else is there? Don't hurt other people and don't take their stuff. And so from my perspective, I felt like that was a political philosophy that I could get behind and I really could embrace. And, I don't want to see, there are certain things that I disagree with from the standpoint of lifestyle choices. But I also feel like it's important for me to extend to people the right to live their lives other than how I want to live my life, because I want them to extend that same right to me. And as long as they're not hurting somebody else and they're not taking somebody else's stuff, you do as you wish. And I understand that's not totally black and white. There's a lot of gray area that comes in there as far as what does it mean to hurt somebody else? And what does it mean to take somebody else's stuff? I 100% acknowledge that. But I really do feel like that's a great place to start. And I really think when you say that to people, the vast majority of people can get behind that. I understand there are people that are extreme one way and the other, and I think COVID showed us a lot of that of people on the left who were very extreme as far as, it's so funny to me, some of the loudest ones that were screaming this time around with regards to Harris and, my body, my choice, and all behind this, abortion thing were some of the loudest voices screaming at people that you need to be vaccinated, you have to wear a mask, all of that kind of stuff. And it's just, the fact that people can't connect those dots is just absolutely mind-blowing to me. But I really fully embrace that principle of don't hurt other people, Don't take their stuff. We start from that point, and then from there, yes, we're going to have discussions as far as about that gray area, as far as where does it, how does that all flesh out? But if you want to buy a beer on Sunday, Al, blessings on you. You want to go out and shoot a deer on Sunday, blessings on you. Like I feel like sometimes
I was hiding a Bud Light down here. I didn't want to bring it up because I. Now I feel free.
Hey, even Kid Rock drinks Bud Light again.
It's
now,
a breath
Albert,
of fresh
so
air,
So that, that's a little bit of my, I guess, political philosophy and kind of how I landed at where I'm at. Because again, it's just I really do believe that. Am I getting some feedback too?
Yeah, I'm getting feedback from somebody. I'm not sure it is.
Yeah.
Try again, Brian.
All right. But yeah, so that's just a little bit of kind of my political philosophy, how I arrived at where I'm at. And I'm pretty comfortable being here. I really feel like if Jesus was political, he'd be a libertarian. I mean, I just,
I love it. So where does that leave you, Brian, as far as how do you view Trump and all this, the Trump politics and stuff through that lens?
Yeah, no, and that's something. It's a great question because in 2016, let me kind of back up a little bit to 2012 when I registered Libertarian. I at that point in my life I was not very politically active. I had kind of backed away from the standpoint of going out knocking on doors, that kind of stuff. I ran my mouth online, because that's what you do.
Don't we all?
Yeah, I've done that.
Scream at people you're going to change their ideas. I'd like to think I've matured a little bit in that, but every once in a while, people push me over the edge, and I'll call a spade a spade. But in 2012, when I registered Libertarian, I kind of promised myself I would never vote for a Republican candidate ever again in a presidential election. And the other promise that I made myself is that I was done voting lesser of the two evils. From my perspective, I wanted people to earn my vote, and not that I'm looking for a perfect candidate, because there is no such thing until such time as I run for office. Then at that point, angels will sing, the heavens will open, the sun will shine.
Oh, get deep in here.
But I really, so anyhow, in 2016, I gladly supported Gary Johnson. I went and waved signs for Gary Johnson. I was happy to support Gary Johnson. Not that he was a perfect candidate. There were some issues there. But I certainly, at that point, I couldn't stand Hillary. And there was a lot about Donald Trump that I didn't like, just from the standpoint of I felt like many times he acted like a petulant child, and Gary Johnson, for all of his faults, I felt like acted, for lack of a better term, more presidential. And not that my vote was based on that, but there was a certain, I don't know if you want to call it adultness that I felt like was there. So I voted for him in 2016. In 2020, I kind of plugged my nose and voted for Joe Jorgensen, not because I was very happy with Joe Jorgensen, but because I was trying to vote strategically. And one of the things that happened in New York State is that in order for us to be able to run libertarian candidates, it used to be that we only had to get a certain number of gubernatorial votes in an election. And they changed that to then include we had to basically recertify every 2 years with a presidential run. And so my vote for Joe Jorgensen was as much about ballot access in New York State as it was about Joe Jorgensen. I really wasn't thrilled with her as a candidate, but it was more a strategic vote. And so now fast forward to this election, because of us losing the ballot access fight in 2020, we were behind the 8 ball as far as trying to get a Libertarian candidate on the ballot in New York State. We had to go out and petition before our nomination ever took place. And so we were having a petition for a stand-in candidate, which was very, very difficult. And so long story short, we weren't able to get the Libertarian on the ballot in New York State. And then I started paying attention. So that kind of knocked that out for me. I could write in the Libertarian candidate, but there was no strategic advantage to that from my perspective. And so then I started listening to RFK Jr. My son was way on board the RFK Jr. bandwagon far before I was. And while there were a lot of positions that he held that I didn't like, there was a lot of things that he said that I did like. And so I was really heavily on board that bandwagon. I signed a petition to get him on the ballot. Then, of course, the corrupt establishment knocked him off that ballot. Mm-hmm. And then I was kind of like, okay, what do I do now? Do I write in none of the above? Do I write in RFK Jr.? What do I do? And I was really heavily leaning towards that until Trump got shot the first time. And when they shot Trump the first time, and he stood up and he did his fight, I was like, that's pretty daggum ballsy right there.
It definitely was.
But you know, Trump is also the consummate showman. Mm-hmm. And so I certainly wasn't going to vote for him on the basis of that. But it really started to make me question, why do they want him dead so bad? And then when they went to try to kill him a second time, I'm like, why do they want him dead so bad? Mm-hmm. And then RFK Jr., dropped out, supported him. And I don't remember exactly what sequence it was in. Tulsi Gabbard, who I respect greatly from the standpoint of being anti-war, mm-hmm. she jumps on board. And so it's like all of a sudden these dominoes started falling for me. And I started to understand that maybe the Republican Party of Donald Trump is not the Republican Party of George W. Bush. And when I saw Harris, gladly cheering for the endorsement of Cheney, Liz Cheney, and Dick Cheney. Again, Dick Cheney, war criminal. He should be in jail at best, probably before a firing squad at worst. Absolute war criminal. He and George W. Bush and Colin Powell and Donald Rumsfeld. I have no use for any of them. I'm gonna be a little strong here in my words, but there's a special place in hell for all of those guys. No use for any of them. And so all of that, looking at the Cheney endorsement, et cetera, it really pushed me to look at Donald Trump being, kind of a potential candidate to vote for. Him showing up at the Libertarian National Convention kind of played a part in it, but him listening and seeming to build around himself this time around a coalition of people that seem to be less traditionally Republican and more libertarian in their philosophy, although I don't necessarily agree with all of their positions in every area. When you put it together as a whole, I was like, I think I might be able to get behind this. And I think the tipping point for me was the Joe Rogan interview. When I listened to the Joe Rogan interview and I heard him talk about the mistakes he had made as far as the appointments in the first term, I was like, I'm hoping, and it seems to me so far, him saying no to Pompeo, him saying no to Nikki Haley. I'm like, I'm hopeful. Him committing publicly that he's going to free Ross Ulbricht. I'm hopeful that we may have a guy here who truly. I mean, you've got people now saying, Mike Lee, I think, said end the Fed.
Hey, Brian. Brian,
Yeah.
real quick, has he committed to freeing Ross Ulbricht for sure? I hadn't heard for sure that was a done deal. I know that Dave Smith and Joe Rogan were talking about it, and Dave was hoping hard that it was going to happen.
He made that promise at the Libertarian National
That's
Convention.
right. Dave said that. Yes.
He did.
Dave's point was now it's time to follow through on it, Mr.
That's
President.
exactly
as soon as
it.
you take that oath again. Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Okay.
And so, to me, that's what, based on what I'm seeing so far, I'm excited. I just hope he follows through. And so I'm waiting to see on day one, does he actually do that? What level of influence does RFK Jr. actually have with regards to, the various departments of health and so on and so forth?
Mm-hmm.
I'm optimistic. And the fact that he's not putting neocons, or he's publicly disavowed some neocons, really does give me hope.
No Nikki Haley, no Mike Pompeo.
Oh, it's glorious. It's glorious.
Yes.
Yeah, so now I'm going to explain myself on why I had to hold my nose and vote for Harris. She lost me when she started hanging out with the Cheneys.
I'm glad to hear that, Al. I wondered what you'd say about that.
No way.
Yeah.
But I cannot vote for a guy who's 78 years old who I think his brain is melting. So Trump is a fake populist. He'll tell you anything he wants to hear because he so much wants to be accepted. So he might have kicked out all the warmongers, which is great. I like that about him, right? I have no qualms. He's anti-war. But how is he going to handle it? Is he going to just give everything to Putin and give the West Bank to Israel and let them annex it? That would be an easy fix, but would it be the right fix? So that's what I'm. So with the Israeli vote, with the Israeli influence in the United States government, basically demanding money from us when Sharon comes over here, and the large support that he has with evangelicals, I'm really interested to see how truly much he is against war when it comes to Israel and them going after Lebanon and starting a whole larger war in the Middle East. Like they are pushing the line. And why if any other country came to us, we'd tell them to kick rocks. Well, other than the Ukraine, you know what I mean? But anyways, they Sharon will come over and he'll do like a meeting with the Republican Congress because them said, we're not going to give you any more money, rein it in. And he's like, screw you guys. And he'll come over and demand money. So, okay. So that was my rant about Trump. So he surrounds himself, not with warmongers, but he surrounds himself with corporate money. He's got Musk jumping around on stage with him. He was not pro-electric cars. Now he is. All of a sudden, imagine that, because you just don't get $1 million a day or whatever it was for free. So there's still money in politics playing a huge role. His first administration, I'm smartest. I picked the best and brightest people. Then the next day he's firing everybody. So he needs to get on board and do better this time around and actually listen to his advisors and political people rather than going off the cuff. The Joe Rogan interview was good for him because a lot of people don't watch traditional media anymore. They're unplugged. A lot of people are on podcasts. Joe Rogan was back and forth on Trump. Early days, he wasn't really into it. Early, even this year, he was talking about how awesome Kamala Harris was. However, bringing Trump on humanized Trump to a lot of people. Joe Rogan, I would say 3/4 of his audience now are Trump voters. So when Trump came on, Joe Rogan asked him questions that weren't necessarily asked by the media. Trump felt really relaxed. When Trump is Trump, he's a showman. And he was able to come across as being empathetic, human, and less of a robot. Voters hate robots. The Dems and Republicans have begun to like corporate robots every single election. And That's one thing that I'm really tired of. I don't need somebody up there being a corporate robot, doing what their donors say, and forget about me working in the factory, because that's not going to help me out at all. And
I have to jump in here. I have to jump in here because Al, I'm so glad you're here, because what I'm finding is that I'm agreeing with like 35-40% of what you're saying, maybe even 50, to be honest. It's probably about 50-50, and I keep wanting to respond, but I know Ben hasn't had a chance to say anything yet.
I can see his blood pressure rising over there, man.
Just a bit over there.
Yeah, I just want to finish up on Harris. So what I'll make it quick. So what happened was, here I had two old guys, or I could vote in Harris, who was closing the gap that Biden would have had. Trump would have rolled every single state if Biden would have been in. Here you have people on like Morning Joe and all those traditional corporate media website news sites pretending that Joe Biden was a spry young person behind the scenes and he's going to do all this and he should stay in. And then Kamala comes in, and at least she was under the age of 70 and whose brain was not melting, close the
Such
gap.
An ageist.
Close the 15% gap to get to even close to Trump. Like
we need to put a pin in this, because I don't know if I agree that Biden would have done worse than Kamala did.
Oh, he would have got steamrolled. He wasn't even able. He would have.
I don't know.
He would have got steamrolled. So
I think Trump would have beat him, but I don't know if it would have been any. I don't know that it even would have been as bad.
Oh, it would have been horrible. But she was able to close the gap by somewhat and have a somewhat election, maybe. So I held my nose and voted for her. I didn't have anybody else. I could not vote for RFK.
Ben, you got something you want to ask these guys?
Oh, I've got a laundry list. So, yeah, I understand Al's point of not wanting to vote the way evangelicals do, because I have a strong feeling of disgust when I realize that I'm voting and rooting for the same people that a Jim Blank and a Dan Stetler are voting for. It's like, ugh. But I got kids. This transgender thing that has been pushed so far on the woke left is insanity, and it is bled. It's everywhere. It is in the little tiny schools out here in nowhere, West Texas. I also am, in my belief, abortion is murder. And I honestly, and I mean, this is a question for Brian to respond to, because I honestly do not understand how a Christ follower can vote for a Kamala Harris or anyone in the Democrat Party who has made abortion the number one issue. They have a freaking bus at the Democrat convention in Chicago to perform abortions there. I don't understand. I am being dead serious. This is not political hyperbole. I do not understand how a Christ follower who said the children are the most important, not these fake leaders that every religious organization puts up, but how a Christ follower supports that agenda. And I'm fully on board with Al with the Israel Gaza thing. I'm so anti-Israel government, but I failed to do the research that we talked about, Phil. But I am confident that there are more dual citizens of Israel in the Democrat leadership and the Democrat elected positions than there are on the Republican side. So they may want to give a little lip service to Palestine and whatnot. They're never actually going to do that. They're going to continue to fund Israel, because the Israel government and the Mossad are one and the same with the CIA and the FBI. So if to act like a vote for Trump is actually going to be more harmful to Palestine, I think is a delusion. But yeah, I came to honestly, I think growing up, my mom wouldn't even say who she voted for. politics was never really pushed in the CHM churches I was a part of. And, I was 15 when 9/11 happened. So I'm like, yeah, let's go kill them. But
I need to jump in real quick and agree with as far as my experientially for myself, Ben, with something you just said that is somewhat in contrast to, I think, the CHM churches that Brian and Al grew up in. I guess it was like, honestly, it was like the CHM churches I was in until I was a teenager were so conservative and so right wing that it was like politics was of the things of the world, so it just wasn't something that came into play, I guess you could say. I know what you guys are talking about when you say that you felt like almost like holiness doctrine and republicanism were entangled, but my growing up experience. I mean, we certainly weren't Democrats, I'll put it that way, but it was like the Republicans really sort of weren't a thing either. I mean, Reagan wasn't even really someone I heard much about. So I just wanted to jump in and underscore that, Ben.
See, Glenn, I saw around West Hill and Clinton Camp, places like that. I saw more what Al and Brian are talking about. We had Sheldon Stevens that would come through, and Sheldon Stevens, I'm trying to remember exactly how he said it at Clinton Camp that time. Something about that, Jesus can save Democrats too, or something like that. Like it was very cut and dried. Right. And we all thought that Sheldon Stevens knew what he was talking about because he read the Jerusalem Post. So therefore, he knew all the Bible prophecy and all that stuff. The amount of times I heard Netanyahu, oh my gosh.
My grandfather was a Democrat, but he was an old time Free Methodist. He switched to Democrat because the town supervisor wouldn't patch a hole out front of his house. So he voted Republican up till then. So every time we went to church, there were times Grandpa walked out, did not shake hands with the preacher. He knew that. Why not? He'd be sitting in the car. Graham, where's Grandpa? Oh, he's sitting in the car. He's upset. So you go out and you hear a whole sermon on the way home. He would tell me, Al, you open your Bible and you sit in that pew. Whenever the preacher starts talking politics, it's not out of the Bible. You don't need to listen to him. So that's where I got so combative, at least.
Yeah.
At least in debating the preacher.
Yeah.
Grandpa, he knew he was going to heaven. He didn't have a problem with it. But man, the preacher was on the wrong side of his politics. He didn't have to shake his hand because that wasn't from the Lord.
Al, you talk about some of those old timers being Democrats. West Virginia was a Democrat stronghold up until about 2000 when it started to change over. So my dad, who was born in 1933, was a Democrat for many, many years. Dave Maley, who pastored Wesleyan Holiness Church here in Grafton, he was a Democrat for a long time. In fact, I think it was his dad who, I think he passed away in like the 70s, something like that. I've heard my mom talk about him that he said he would vote for the devil if he was running on the Democrat ticket. That's how strongly he felt about it.
Whoa.
So it's some of those old timers were definitely Democrats.
Yeah, I remember it was the election, one of the election where Myers from the Pilgrims made a prediction at a youth rally that I think it was during the Bush race. It was between Gore and Bush, and no, it wasn't that because the Republican.
It was somebody that lost. I think it was the Obama. McCain one. If I'm hearing the story where he said that he had prayed through and that God had told him that Bush or that the Republican was going to win. I believe it was McCain. He had prayed through on that, and God had told him.
This again?
My dad still talks about that.
Yeah.
My dad
who made the prediction or said God had given him a revelation?
It was Myers from he was conference president of Pilgrim Holiness.
Oh, Don Myers. I know who that is.
Yeah,
Don Myers. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And to kind of piggyback off that a little bit, and then I want to go back to something that, the conversation with regards to abortion, because I think that's an important point to make.
Yeah.
But I heard so many things like that with regards to people, praying through on so and so, or that God told them this, that, or the other things with regards to politics, and just like 88 Reasons Why Christ was going to come back in 88, there was a big old swing and a miss. And it is hard for me to jive that kind of stuff with, and it's one of those things where I think when you see people making statements like that, perhaps well-meaning but very, very unwise, it can leave a rather bitter taste in your mouth for sure, and kind of push you in a different direction. But going back to what Ben was saying with regards to abortion, because my pastor that I had back in 2008, he and I had some very, very frank conversations about that, simply because I felt the very same way that Ben does with regards to that. And one of the things that what he said is he definitely did not support abortion as a means of birth control. He did not support late-term abortion and those kinds of things. But his concern was that the Republican Party was not a party that was pro-life. It was a party that was pro-birth. And so, to a certain extent, his support of Democrats was because he felt like the Democrat policies were more in line with being pro-life. The social support, the policies, food stamps, welfare, so on and so forth, were more in line with us living out the commandments of Christ and loving our neighbor, taking care of our neighbor, and those kinds of things. Now, I certainly didn't agree with him on that point, but I also understood his perspective, because to this day, I feel like many people who claim to be pro-life are not pro-life. They're pro-birth. And that
Can
is
I say this, though? Can I say this? That feels like a dodge to me, though. You know what I mean? Because it just is sort of moving from one, not on your part, but the whole argument does.
But I don't necessarily, I understand how you can see that as a dodge, because to a certain extent, you're saying, it can be extrapolated that you're saying, well, because you're pro-birth and not pro-life, therefore it's okay to kill a baby. And I'm not making that. It
sort of sounds like it.
And I'm not making that argument at all. I'm not making that argument.
Think you are. Right, I understand that.
At all. And my pastor was not making that argument at all.
Okay.
But he was simply pointing out that he believed, if you were to put the two philosophies side by side, well, he did not like the abortion issue. He felt like following through with caring for the widow and caring for the orphan and those kinds of things, he saw a role for government in fulfilling those commandments. And so he felt like it was maybe to a certain extent a lesser of the two evils. I'm getting more feedback somewhere.
Yeah, I am too. While we fix the feedback issue, maybe, couldn't it be both and, though? And I know we're talking theoretical. We're not talking with the people that actually said it to you at first. But that would be my question on that front. Couldn't it be both and instead of either or?
I think there's probably an argument for that. But the point being is that when he started explaining to me a little bit more about his perspective, I began to understand and to be able to have a little bit more grace that he was wrestling with a balance as far as how do we best reach out and serve the community around us. And certainly he would have never been somebody who was pro-abortion from the standpoint of birth control by any stretch of the imagination. But he was also somebody who he and his wife had worked in for several years in an orphanage in Kentucky, and they actually adopted a girl from that orphanage, and that really caused them a lot of heartache. Adopting that girl, she ended up running away. The cops were called. I mean, it was a lot of upheaval. And there was a guy that came to our church who was very, very much anti-abortion. He would go outside the abortion clinics with the signs, and he would march and he would picket. And every time we would have a Bible study, he would bring up abortion, and it was kind of like his hobby horse. He was just always back to abortion. And finally, one day, my pastor said, "Listen, so-and-so, until you've adopted a child, until you've put your money where your mouth is, I don't want to hear you say anything more about abortion."
Yeah, that's one of the things that I noticed too, and I'm not at all being a huge lib, and my arms are sore from hugging trees and all. But I am not for using abortion as birth control. Like, they need access to have birth control. I am not for ruling it out those types of things. There are laws in place, or thinking about putting laws in place for doing that. And that was one of the things coming out of the CHM. A lot of those people would be pro-life, however, none of them adopt. There was like one family that I knew out of the whole movement that had maybe 5 or 6 kids that they pulled out of orphanages. And all the support that we ever did wasn't to orphanages or places that needed it. It was overseas, to like, oh, we gotta fund the Haitians. Please pray for the Haitians, because brother so and so is going to come in and he's going to show us a big long snake that he had, and we're going to sleep through a missionary meeting. And they could have took $20 or $30 that little congregation of 10 people raised and gave it to the orphanage. But then the same people will complain about welfare recipients. Welfare recipients mostly goes to kids. So, being a tree hugger and lib, yes, I'm for helping kids. And yes, I'm for feeding kids and all that in schools, because a lot of times in the economy that we're in, when all the corporations get the tax breaks, families don't have the money. And the church isn't picking up the slack, even though they're yelling the loudest.
You know, I think one reason I enjoy conversations like this is I think that so many times we get really pitted against one another by the national media. And my side was always told that they just like to kill babies. They just want to kill babies. There might be people out there like that, but I would imagine, Brian, that there's a decent amount of people that have that same philosophy there, which, again, I don't agree with it, but I can understand and respect where he's coming from on that. And I think, too, Al, real quick, to your point, I think that churches, Christians, we failed a lot in society to take up the slack in a lot of these areas, thus resulting in some of that reputation of pro-birth but not pro-life.
So Ben asked the question, how could we support it? It's the same way that we support the killing of kids in war.
Oh.
We have no problem funding Palestinian kids getting killed, decimated, genocide almost, because they're getting moved out. That place is going to be totally rebuilt. They're digging up the infrastructure right now. That's how it can happen. You don't feel a thing. You just send your money.
No, I agree with that 100%. Where I do feel like, and this goes back to, I think, the old Republican Party, which is why I'm very happy to see the Republican Party seeming to change, is that some of the people that I know that were the strongest anti-abortion people were some of the biggest war hawks that were okay with us lie. They loved George W. Bush and the fact that he lied to get us into Iraq and Afghanistan, and didn't bat an eye to the amount of innocent people that were killed in that. It totally makes me sick. And so I get, especially people, again, going back to that particular issue there, where the Democratic Party used to be the party that was anti-war. There were people that voted on that issue. In the abortion issue, they didn't like abortion, but they also looked at it from the standpoint of, I don't like war. I don't want us messing around in other parts of the world. And so I think it's one of those situations where you don't have a perfect option. You don't have a perfect option, and you're kind of left with the lesser of the two evils. And it's a matter of, what do you think is the bigger evil? And one more thing to say about abortion. And this is one of the things where I'm somebody who strongly believes that life begins at conception. I believe that life begins at conception, and I don't think. But having said that, I also understand that there are other faith traditions, and even within the Christian faith tradition, that's not a universally agreed upon premise. There are some who believe that life begins at the quickening, which I've understood that that's when you can feel the fetus moving. I don't agree with them on that.
Yeah,
but
I think Judaism is at the first breath because God breathed in the man. Yeah,
I didn't know this. At
yeah.
all.
we can look it up. Sure.
Yeah. So when you start looking into some of that, I do believe that there are good faith arguments with regards to at what point you draw the line. I believe that with all my heart. And so, while I have one perspective, I also feel like I should have grace for people that maybe have a little bit of a different perspective. Having said that, I also do not believe that abortion should ever be used for birth control. I don't believe that there should ever be, if the baby can live outside the mother without support, it should never ever be killed. Partial birth and abortion is an absolute abomination, and anybody who does so needs to be locked up and put in a cell. Like, I think that there are some areas where we can draw some hard and fast lines to say this is wrong, this is not acceptable. But also, I believe that until such time we start dealing with, okay, what do we do with unwanted children? And if we're going to demand that these children be born, how are they taken care of? Then I feel like we've missed the mark as well. And so I believe that there needs to be changes with regards to laws around adoption. Adoption is way too expensive.
Yes.
Adoption is way too complicated. Adoption needs to be adjusted. And not that I'm saying that everybody that wants a child, that we should be giving them away. You get a kid, everybody gets a kid, like Oprah Winfrey. I'm not suggesting that at all. But on the other hand, I believe that though there needs to be changes there. I believe that the church needs to step up and needs to be more proactive with regards to caring for unwed mothers and teenage girls. I believe that we need to do better with regards to supporting single family parents, that if we're going to demand these kids come in to the world, then we need to have a bit of responsibility and a bit of ownership, because I believe that that's what the Bible teaches.
Ben, I saw you rear back in your chair there. It looked like you was getting you had something ready to roll.
Yeah. So I agree wholeheartedly on that. I mean, that's where that's where the Democrat Party has gone so far to the left that it's unreasonable. When you have California representatives and that woman in Virginia that gave a speech in public in their state house saying they are fully for, making a decision. There's no limit. The baby can be born full term, laying there crying, and you can decide you don't want it. You can terminate it. That is how far the Democrat Party has gone. And
no,
they have gone.
Hold on, Ben. Hold on. I would say that's how far that Democrat has gone, because I don't think that's representative of the entire Democratic Party. Because I know a lot of Democrats that don't share that perspective. So I don't think
because they left it behind.
It would be murder, because once the baby's born, it's a living being, and that you would be charged with homicide and murder. So
do a survey. Do a survey of the Democrat Party. It is no longer okay to be pro-choice. You now have to be pro-abortion. And go do a survey of your Democrat comrades and come back and find out how many of them believe that there should be any restriction on abortion, because that they have gone that far. And I fully agree that the afterbirth and not afterbirth, but the postpartum care has to be improved. But your former pastor preacher that was a Democrat, he was for the state doing it. Why wasn't he for the church providing that care? The church is supposed to provide for the widows and orphans. And the church has dropped the ball. The government's picked it up. It's just like right here, the little fellowship, the guy that I like a lot, this past week, they had a Honduran lady with her 7 kids. They're illegal immigrants who are worried. The police department found them in the park. They're homeless because dad got a DUI and got deported. And there's 7 kids under the age of 14. So the police department called Steve and they put them in a hotel. And they went and bought clothes for these kids. And these people all just want to go home. And there's going to be a whole lot of this stuff going. These people they're victims because they have come here thinking that we're just the land of milk and honey, and they've made the voyage to get here. And the government's dropped the ball on taking care of them. They sent dad home. They left the whole family here. And so the churches have a lot of opportunity to be the church. And in these unwanted kids is another example of it. Yes, abortion needs to be much easier, much more streamlined, much more
You mean adoption?
Yeah, adoption. I was like,
Adoption.
You said
You said
abortion.
I thought you're on my side.
Oh, so you done turned it down.
Adoption needs to be much. We should pay people to adopt kids, pretty much. As long as they pass background checks.
I love that idea.
I love the idea, and same for immigration. Our to become a citizen is so hard, and it's almost like the rich and the educated are the only ones that are able to do that at a timely basis. Like we
but
say
that's no different than Canada.
Come on in, but like
Canada, you have to prove why you're of value to go there. I know a doctor who was wanting to go work in British Columbia, and her fiance, who was an engineer, he didn't have enough value to the government of Canada to allow them to immigrate. So, but why do those people need citizenship? Why can't we give them a green card to work? We should do this, but back to neither side wants to fix it. The right has wanted cheap labor, and the left has wanted voters. So leave the border open. It's beneficial to both of us.
Well, the voters didn't come for us this time, Ben. The voters, all the illegal immigrants, we came up short.
Yeah, because you've aborted the black voters. You've aborted half of the black American population, and the Hispanics are never going to be okay with transgender stuff because their whole language is gendered. Everything in the Spanish language is male and female. Why did you ever think they were going to be okay with woke?
Illegal voters voted for Trump accidentally.
Okay, hey, you
Glenn,
guys,
go ahead, sir.
We've mashed like 3 or 4 issues all together in the last 60, 90 seconds, which to me is a perfect chance to kind of pull everything back in and ask a question. Sorry, Phil, I don't mean to hijack.
Go ahead, Glenn.
But I had because then I think we can talk sequentially about all these issues after I hear what you guys have to say and answer the question I'm going to ask. But the immigration issue, the transgender issue, we've been talking about abortion and the role of government in our lives, all of these things. But I have to ask all of you. 4 of us voted for Trump, 1 of us didn't. But the question I want to hear you guys each pontificate on is, in your heart of hearts, did you think Trump would win, number one, before Election Day was over? Did you think that? And 2, if you thought he would win, did you think it would be the magnitude that it is? So I'll go first. I'll answer the question myself. Did I think Trump would win? I hoped so. I felt like he would if there was only minimal cheating that took place on the part of the Democrats. It felt good. It felt like after Kamala had that interview with Bret Baier, especially, it just felt like the tide really shifted, and then bad things kept happening to her campaign, from Biden's garbage comment to her telling the 2 young kids who shouted out Christ is King that they were at the wrong rally. I mean, it was just all these Kodak moment after Kodak moment events. So I hoped he would. Did I really think he would? I was not very optimistic. I certainly did not envision the level, the monumental mandate that this election has constituted, or that he would pull off the popular vote by several million. I did not see that.
Glenn, I thought different times over the course of this campaign, if I was Kamala Harris's campaign manager, I would have wanted to cut my own throat multiple times. If nothing else, just for the stuff that Joe Biden was pulling, like with the putting on the Trump hat and then standing there long enough to get a good picture and then leaving with the Trump hat, keeping the Trump hat as he left. Yeah, there was multiple things like that just there that yeah, I would have had a nervous breakdown.
So did that make you optimistic? Is that what you're saying?
I was very cautiously optimistic. Let me put it that way. I think a lot of the people that were getting on board with Trump, like Joe Rogan, who I think was Al had said in the past, Joe Rogan's not been a Trump fan as far as at least in real deep. People like Tulsi and RFK Jr. and like even Dr. Phil, somebody I never thought would, these are people that I've heard be critical of him in the past, if I'm not mistaken. So I was very cautiously optimistic, but I don't think I was, I don't think I have a very good read on things because I thought 2020 was in good shape, and obviously it went the opposite direction. So I didn't trust myself enough to really be all hyped up. So it was a bit of a surprise, I think, to me.
For me, it was tied up. I'm pessimistic just because of my job and with the pottery and all, because I hope for I prepare for the worst and hope for the best. However, the way the Harris campaign was run, I didn't really have much of a choice, and both sides, to me, were doing things that seemed they both wanted to lose. Like they were making gaffes. So we talk about the garbage comment, but some of the
Tony Hinchcliffe
crazy, outlandish thing was saying, like, even letting Elon jump around on stage like a monkey. Like, what better way to be like, hey, I got corporate on board with me, and he's trying to run as a populist. So, like,
how dare you talk about an African American like that?
It almost seems.
Hey,
it almost
Al,
seems
I want to ask you a question though, Al. That kind of put your objective hat on for a minute. Do you think? I see what you mean when you say that about Elon Musk, but do you think anyone who wasn't voting your way would have even been tempted to think that way? I'm skeptical, I guess.
Yeah, because what I'm thinking is, well, let me finish what I was going to say first. So I had no idea, and I was just holding my nose, voting for her, and hoping like it would. I knew it was either going to be close, but I was surprised, by how far ahead he won. To get back to yours, being that when Harris went and started catering to the Cheneys and sent Mark Cuban out saying to all the rich, hey, don't worry, it's still going to be like the Biden. We're not going to bother with the corporate. We're going to keep everything the same. Seeing that Trump paired up with Musk at the end, I thought that would damage him because we're more towards populist policies. They sent him in there to be a bull in the China shop. Because they were sick of the status quo. They were sick of the establishment. They were sick of the corporate robots that only do what, their donors say to do. And Trump appears that way to many of those voters now, where Harris was buddying up with all the corporate donors.
Right.
So, I thought when he paired with Musk, I'm like, why is he trying to lose the election? So because of that, I thought, yeah.
Yeah. Hey, I wanted to, before Ben and Brian say their piece about all this, a quick bipartisan moment here, I guess. That I don't know if you've had a chance yet to see Bernie Sanders made some remarks about the campaign that Kamala ran, and I read the whole write-up about it. I agreed with just about everything he said.
Yeah, I agreed with it. And I think I was thinking in my mind, why now? You know, like how come Bernie didn't come out and say all this stuff when we were being lied to that Joe Biden was a spry young guy behind closed doors by Morning Joe and MSNBC and all those supporters? You know, why didn't Bernie come out? You know, so everybody comes out at the last minute in hindsight.
Well, that's politics, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Al, let me ask you something about Elon. Do you think, and obviously, you know, he is a billionaire and all that. So whatever he is, obviously he is, but do you think he's actually viewed as that by the majority of people? Because he kind of, you know, his whole Twitter buying thing, and he kind of portrays himself as not being your typical big business guy, as far as he kind of looks like a little bit of an outlier. Do you think that that's why that didn't hurt Trump, in your opinion?
I think so. So on a previous episode, and I really wish that we were able to talk a bit about conspiracy, because I think that we have some fundamentalist holdovers.
I'm sure we could.
Coming from the church, when we're trying to figure out numbers in Revelation, we do the same thing in politics. So Ben was saying, I can't figure out who in government would be supporting Israel or taking support from Israel. IPAC is a super PAC from Israel that wants tons of money. They pay one side to say no and the other to say yes. That's why we're in Israel. That's why the leaders can come over here, hold a joint session of Congress, and demand money and demand arms. So it's no big conspiracy theory. Like, these things are very easy. So one of your episodes, Phil and Ben, you all were discussing politics, and Ben was getting into all this stuff about Don Jr. being brilliant and all this stuff. And you were like, they had heavy hitters at that convention. I was like, these guys have not read their tweets at all. Like, 10 tweets on social media would tell you guys that none of these people play three-dimensional chess, all right? Like, these guys are not like rocket scientists. So, but I can understand that if they're your preachers, you're going to love them, and you're going to love the message they're giving.
Reverend Don Jr.
But all I'm saying is that
that's definitely down Ben's alley to love the preachers. For sure.
You do not need to carry 88 reasons why into politics. I think we have fun doing that, and it's fun to speculate. But we can get in so deep, we can become an Alex Jones just because of our fundamentalist evangelical hangovers. Like, why are we
Ben's gotta go next.
Why are we taking all these things that we used to do in evangelicalism, doing the math, trying to figure out Christ's return and all that silly stuff, and applying it to politics? We just naturally do it. I am not sure. And so I am not a huge conspiracy guy. All you need to do is look for the money.
Yeah, that's a good point. Brian and Ben, why don't you, because I have something I want to kind of follow up with on that too, but you guys, I want to get your answer to Glenn's question about what you thought going in, if you thought he was going to win or not.
All right. So I'm a nerd. I'm a data guy. And I ran across a guy by the name of Seth Keschel. If you look him up on X, he's a data guy. And I started following him, and what he said made sense, because I'm looking at him, what my eyes were telling me. And it looked to me like there's no way that Harris could ever win this. It looked to me, just from a data perspective, based on what he was sharing, I'm like, and this is taking polling out of it, because polls are garbage. Polls are based on a snapshot in time. Polls can be skewed to say whatever you want based on sample size. Polls they're trying to assume what is going to be the electorate this time around. Polls are absolute garbage. But it's easy to get caught up in the polls, and you follow the real clear politics average. And I would follow that almost on an hour by hour basis. And then but then again, in the back of my mind, my head's telling me that's garbage. That's garbage. Don't pay attention to it. So Seth Keshel, he brought up with regards to voter registrations and how across the United States, almost without fail, every state that tracks voter registrations had shifted very significantly to the right. Some places by double digits as far as, and so I'm looking at that and I'm saying, how in the world, if that data point, which is something that we can measure, and the public has shifted to the right so hard, how in the world can she win this? Obviously, I'm taking into consideration all of the gaffes that she had made, all of the just the nothing there. And I understood when she came onto the scene, she was the least popular vice president in, I think, modern history. I think she was even less popular than Dan Quayle. But the fact is, she wasn't Joe Biden, and she had a pulse, and she was, kind of the perfect package from the standpoint of she's a person of color, whether she's black or Indian or whatever. We can debate that all day long, but she's a person of color, she's a minority, and she's a female. And so I'm looking at that, I'm saying, well, does that give her an edge? And I'm thinking, I look back and I thought back to the Obama and the hopey changey stuff and people that were so excited to go vote for the first black president. I mean, I know people that voted solely on that because they were excited to do that. And then in 2016, people that were excited to go vote for Hillary because they were excited to go vote for a female. And the people that I saw and I know that were excited to vote for Obama because he was the first black president weren't excited to vote for her because she was the first minority female. And the people that I know that were excited to vote for Hillary because she was the first woman president didn't seem to have the same enthusiasm for her. So she comes onto the scene and there's like this inflation that happens by the media pushing that narrative, but quickly it starts falling flat. And then she goes out and she just keeps repeating the same things over and over and over again, but there was no substance. There was no there. And so I'm thinking, okay, what in the world could people be excited to go vote for her on? She did not have any kind of, people just weren't enthused. People that I know that are very, very political didn't put up Harris Waltz signs until the week before the election. That's one of those things where I'm looking at it and I'm saying, okay, my head's telling me this, but am I really seeing what I'm seeing? So I went into it really believing that Trump was going to win. And I really believed he was going to sweep all 7 of the states based on what the 7 of the swing states based on what Seth Keshel had posted. And what he was continuing to post because the data made sense to me. So my head was telling me Trump's going to win it and it's not even going to be close. But my gut, I was in knots because I'm like, where's the cheat coming from this time? And the thing about it is when you look at 2020, and if you just look at the graphs as far as the number of votes, I get that 2020 was a bit different because people were locked in their houses, and there are people who didn't pay attention to politics that paid attention to politics because they didn't have anything else to do. And I get that it was made a lot easier, in my opinion, illegally, by mailing out ballots for people to send in from home. But that still, in my mind, does not account for 14 million votes that did not happen this time around. But even with all of that said, I still, in my gut, my head was telling me it's not going to be close. It's going to be a blowout for Trump. But my gut was in knots until they called Pennsylvania. Yeah. When they called Pennsylvania, at that point, I knew the dominoes were falling Trump's way.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, I was really worried. I'm in like a red spot here, and I had to go out halfway through the night and pull up my Harris signs and so I could blend in.
Ben, what did you think, man? What did you see going into this?
Well, I was similar to Brian, but for different reasons. I think I told Glenn a month ago or so it's going to be a landslide if they don't cheat. And I think they attempted to cheat. Something was going on in Philadelphia. Trump was tweeting about it and stuff. Uh, it comes down to one simple thing that a James Carville quote: "It's the economy, stupid." The price
Yep.
of everything, everybody in the middle class and lower class feeling the pain. You've got these people in the upper class, yeah, they're out there, oh yeah, go Kamala. But everybody in the working class and middle class, they're hurting. I mean, just look at the credit card debt. There's so many economic indicators, and we may end up in a depression yet. It's all headed in a bad direction. So when the economy's bad, people want to change parties. It's pretty simple, and there's nothing exciting. Kamala peaked in August. They try to say, well, she had 107 days to campaign. The people just didn't have a good opportunity to get to know her. No, the more the people heard from her and got to know her, the less and less votes she had. The more she talked, the less it's like everybody's like, she has no life experience. Well, maybe because she's never earned any of the positions that she's been in. Maybe because she's lying about everything she's done. She tried to say she prosecuted the cartels. Yeah, well, she prosecuted a total of like 8 felony cases in her whole career. The woman's never done anything. She has failed upwards, which is a common thing when you're a DEI hire. And maybe we can go back to promoting the best person for the job. If the best person for the job is a white male, let's promote him. If the best person for the job is a black female, let's promote her. Let's go back to merit and get the best people and demand excellence. That's when Trump appoint Trump, and obviously I'm a Trump supporter. Uh, but when he's like, yeah, there's nobody writing books about Joe Biden because he didn't fire anybody. I mean, how could you not fire people over the Afghanistan disaster? That was atrocious. That you can pull out and the total anybody that knows any strategy knows that was set up for failure. And you're seeing people falling off of planes and all these people that helped us that we left behind to get slaughtered after we've spent trillions of dollars in 20 years in Afghanistan, and we pull out like that and nobody gets fired. There's no accountability. I mean, that all those things and back to in 2020, there was COVID was happening, but there was a lot of money. Nobody was broke then. Everybody actually had extra cash, extra money, had stimulus money. And then it was, oh, the Biden campaign and Biden administration will be a return to normalcy. The adults will be back in charge. Well, I'm here to tell you, it's nothing's going back to what it was in 2019. And the chaos and the violence and the acceptance of crime. Although California did just reverse one of their propositions that basically legalized crime, and they're going back the other way because they're sick of it. Because they're letting people steal. I think if it's as long as it's $900, you can't even charge them with a misdemeanor. You can walk out of a store. My brother-in-law's the girl he was dating was working at Michael Kors or some expensive purse store, and they had homeless people walking out of that store with purses every day in San Francisco, and nothing you can do about it. They'd try to maybe stop them in the store or maybe not let them come in the store. Nothing you can do about it. It's perfectly legal. You walk out, they're gone. Hey, see, you go into a Walgreens. You guys, maybe in New York you've seen it, but I mean, a Walgreens, a CVS, where everything's behind a locked glass. I mean, my father-in-law sent videos, and you have to get somebody to unlock every shelf. I mean, people going stopping at the gas station and a whole got a gang rolls up of and of course they'll usually be underage. You're going to be 15, 16 years old, and kids jump out in Oakland or that area, and you just stop for gas and they bust your windows out, especially if they see a traveler, somebody just got in from the airport in a rental car or something. They're busting the windows while you're pumping your gas, grabbing all your luggage. Welcome to California. People are sick of those policies, and it's just gone too far to the left. But yeah, barring cheating, I thought it would be a landslide, but I didn't have any confidence that we'd stop the cheating.
If I could just add one more thing to that, I definitely agree that people generally vote their wallet. If things are going good, they stay with the status quo, and if things aren't going good, they're going to go a different direction. And so I looked at it, and I'm like, Harris, when given the opportunity, blatantly given the opportunity to differentiate herself from Biden, never would. She was like, it's not going to be another extension of the Biden regime, but I can't think of anything different that I would do, which is really an extension of the Biden regime. So,
right, and she would never get angry about anything. She would never become animated. I was like, if you want change, you got to at least be passionate about what you're saying to tell the American people. Like, you got to make your case. She just come out like a robot. Yeah.
The big wild card to me, though, was I didn't know whether or not the overturn of Roe v. Wade, how that would impact the suburban wine drinking mom and the young females at college. And
I didn't either, and it didn't at all. It did in 2022, I think, but not this time.
So that was the other big question in my mind was that issue going to, in their minds, be more important than the financial ones? And somebody put it this way. They said when it all came down to it, they went to the grocery store, and feeding the kids that they have now was far more important than them worrying about kids that they might have in the future.
Very good point.
Yeah, Joe Scarborough just the other day found out that butter was $7. He just found it out because all these rich people, even the libs, they have no idea because they don't go food shopping. You kidding me? Somebody else does that.
Yeah,
it's like they're so.
One of the things that I'm loving so much about this conversation, and Phil, I know you have something you want to ask all of us. One of the things I'm loving so much about this conversation is there's such broad consensus among all five of us, including you, Al. And along the note of what all five of us have been saying, I really wonder, and not only wonder, but hope. I've awakened every morning since Election Day with just new thoughts hitting me all through the day. And the one for today has been, I really hope that these election results signal that Americans are done with being gaslit and lied to and being told they don't really see what they think they see, and the Corinne Jean-Pierres of the world coming up and telling whatever story they want to tell at the press secretary podium, and Biden's sharp as a tack, and everybody knows he isn't really, but look, I'll say it on both sides, broadly speaking, both parties, and there are plenty of Republicans, as I signaled earlier, that I don't care for at all. I don't want to be lied to anymore. This is our government. We hire these people. Whether I like your policies or voted for them or not, I'm tired of being lied to. I'm tired of being gaslit. Tell me the truth. Open up all the smoke-filled rooms. Make the process transparent, 100%. That's the big takeaway for me of what I hope this election represents.
I agree 100%, and I feel like what we've seen is the end of the mainstream media. I really believe that 100%, because podcasts and alternative media really became, and another big piece of it was, and let's just use some of the examples from the Trump campaign, where the mainstream media was trying to advance, and they tried so hard to advance the narrative that Donald Trump had called for the assassination of Liz Cheney.
Yeah.
That you need to, and you could just pull up a clip and see exactly what he had said, and people are like, wait a minute, that's not what he said at all. Where in the past it would have been very, very difficult to do that because they control the narrative, and without having the citizen journalist there to be able to spin that differently, it is what it is. You kind of had to believe what they said. And I also felt like when you got into Trump's interview with Joe Rogan, Al said it perfectly. It humanized him. He came across as somebody very, very personable and much more likable than I had ever seen. And I felt like it was because Joe just sat down and had a conversation with him. And I honestly, I don't think she was capable of doing it, to be honest with you. But I would have loved to have seen Harris do that, because my guess
Me
is
too.
if she would have stopped trying to say what she thought people wanted to hear, and instead she just became a human and started talking about things that really did in fact matter to her, she would have become a lot more human and personable and likable. And the same holds for Waltz.
Yeah,
But-
they should have. That was one of the main things that I was upset about. They held back, and they're like, "Oh, she's not doing interviews." I was like, "How can you not make your case to the American people?"
Yes,
I would have
exactly.
set walls loose. I would have had him all over 24/7, as many he could do, because he was talking it up. He was a showman. He was telling stories, relatable. Not a corporate robot. But then they turned her into a robot just to protect her, and then losing with $1 billion in her hand. That's
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, not even just losing with $1 billion in her hand, losing with $1 billion and ending up in the
20
hole.
million
200
in
and
debt. Yes.
And now Trump's. I heard through the grapevine that Trump's actually offered to pay off her campaign debt.
No, Ben sent me the Truth Social. I think it was on Truth Social that he.
But one of the things that he mentioned in there is that they didn't have to spend as much as they thought they would because they had earned media. And a lot of that goes back to the interviews with Joe Rogan on Theo Vaughn's podcast, and then them setting JD Vance loose, and JD Vance going on Rogan's podcast. They went on so many non-traditional media things, and it was no holds barred. They just sat down, they took questions. And even when Harris went on some non-traditional media stuff, it was so scripted, it was so fake, it was so robotic, and it was so wacky. Like Brad Summer.
Harris on the View? That should have never happened. Like, who can stand the View? Like, my arms are sore from hugging trees, and like, I can't stand the View. Like, I have to turn it down when I'm at the doctor's office. I probably sound like a Republican right now, but I'm serious. Like, we can't have those people representing us because they're corporate media. They're bought and paid for robots. They're handed a script. If you don't say what you're paid to say, you're fired. Like, they're under pressure. You can tell. And, I think the best thing that probably ever happened was Fox. I'm not a huge Tucker fan. I think he's crazy, right? I think he's crazy, but the best thing that ever happened is him getting fired and him doing his own thing because he gets to pick now.
Yeah.
He gets to pick.
Amen, brother.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Ourselves. We need to pick
Hey,
ourselves.
Al.
Yeah.
I've got and Phil, I know you have a question.
No, go ahead.
But Al, I've got to make a statement here that again, just talking to you for the last hour, I would bet you're going to agree with this. One big thing I want to see, I think we have had good Democrat presidents. I think John F. Kennedy, in a lot of ways, was an excellent president. He cut taxes. He was for making overtures to Russia, giving away the store. Yeah. But I want to see the JFK files opened up 100%. There is no reason for those to be sealed anymore. I want to know conclusively what happened on November 22nd, 1963. We, the people, deserve to have answers on this incident that is still, in a lot of ways, deep down, a rupture and a wound in our country. We need answers, and I hope we get them.
Absolutely.
I mean, Trump told Rogan that we would, so Mr. President, I'm sure he's going to be listening to this episode.
Oh, of course.
So, Mr. President.
And as far as Trump is concerned, like, we'll see, right? I need to just put it out there.
I hope he does it. He needs to.
Like Trump, every time I heard him, he's making promises of chicken in every pot. Like he A/B tests his audience all the time. Oh, you don't like that? Okay, I won't say it anymore. So all I'm saying is we'll see, and I hope so, right?
Yeah, I hope so.
Because some of the things, it'll be great, but we hope so.
Al, this is something really for you, or really for all you guys. I think that a lot of times we've seen this in like culture breakers and stuff too, where people that vote for Trump get labeled as cult 45. You left one cult, went right into another one. I think that being able to sit down and have these conversations can kind of show people that, look, you're the other side of the aisle. They're not necessarily got one big eye in their forehead. They're not these crazy lunatics, and that we can have these conversations about disagreeable things that we have strong opinions about, but that we can leave still having respect for one another. And ultimately, I think a lot of times we get ourselves all worked up about these guys. They don't know our name. They don't know anything about us. We'll lose relationships with people because they voted for Kamala or voted for Trump or whatever. And these guys couldn't give two craps about us on an individual level. You know what I mean? They don't care if I can't, if I'm out here trying to pay my bills or something like that, it don't affect them in the slightest. So I think that it's easy to just put all this focus on national politics, particularly, and just completely lose sight of the value of the relationships with your neighbors, your fellow man.
I think that's a great point. I feel like a lot of times, and my grandfather used to say this. He would say to me, Brian, the president is just a figurehead. And I don't know as I necessarily go that far. But on the other hand, I feel like so many times we get wrapped up in who's going to be in the White House, and we don't pay attention to who's running city council. We don't pay attention to who's on the school board.
Oh, yeah.
We don't give two flying flips who's in Albany or whatever your state capital is. And those are the people that really have the opportunity and the ability to impact our quality of life and our day-to-day in a bigger way. And so again, I'm not trying to downplay presidential elections. I think they're important, but I certainly feel like we sometimes miss the bigger picture because we're focused on what we think is the bigger picture. But also, having said that, I also don't believe, and maybe this is just me being way too optimistic. I really don't believe the American people are as divided as what the media wants to make it out to be.
I agree.
I really don't believe that at all. I really believe if you sit down and you have conversations like we've had tonight with people, some people that we agree with, some people that we don't agree with, some people that we partially agree with or whatever, I really do believe at the core, most people want the same things. People want clean air. They want clean water. They want access to people to have a roof over the head, people to have the ability to make a good quality living. You have people that you want kids to be educated. I think people on those broader issues really agree on that. Where we disagree is how do we get there?
Yeah.
And I think if we sit down and we have conversations instead of just screaming at each other and saying, you're a fascist, you're a Marxist, you're evil, you're stupid. Because when you start labeling people like that, it cuts off the ability to have any kind of a constructive conversation at all. And I think if we start assuming maybe that people are coming at these things with good intentions and not evil intention, and not to say that there aren't people that have evil intentions. I understand that there are people like that. But by and large, it's not your neighbor next door. It's not the guy down the street that had the Kamala sign or the Trump sign.
Mm-hmm.
Those people really do have good intentions and they want what is best for future generations. We just disagree on how to get there. So instead of screaming at each other, instead of calling each other names, have a conversation, have a little grace. And in that conversation, instead of listening to respond, listen to understand where that person's coming from.
Exactly right.
Yeah, I think that operating with empathy, generosity, and gratitude comes into play. Like, generous doesn't mean everything needs to be for free and that you should just roll over. But empathy also means you were marginalized at one point in the CHM when we all decided to come out. Remember that with LGBTQ, right? Whatever you happen to be, you may not agree with their lifestyle, but you were once marginalized. We all were. And that last night at revival meeting, remember how you feel when they come around you and they may not feel all that comfortable, right? We can relate. So we may not agree with all their lifestyles, but we've all been marginalized in some way. And that's how they feel. And I don't think that carrying over evangelical fundamentalism into politics, the way we do it sometimes with conspiracy and all the things we talked about, and approaching it, where we said we left one, but really we carried it over into the other and are fine with it. It's very strange to me. So I'm probably still going to vote Democrat just to be on the safe side, unless I go Libertarian with Brian. And I won't drink Bud Light beers with Phil. Maybe, and make him feel uncomfortable if you don't want me to, but I'm okay with drinking Bud Light. And Ben can listen to Alex Jones if he wants. It's just going to be like me listening to Chuck Todd at church. So if you want to know who Chuck Todd was, he was a huge conspiracy theorist on the religion side. So go look him up. You're welcome.
Very good. So you're saying you're not a Q guy, Al, is what I'm hearing.
No. Some of the stuff they were coming up with, I was just like, oh, that was amazing.
Listen,
they were doing all kinds of math.
I don't think I'm in a cult by supporting Trump, but those Q guys, whew, oh my gosh, those guys took it hardcore. I had some people I knew, and the stuff they would tell me, I'd be sitting in the list being like, what are you trying to, like, the one thing I heard was something about Trump was going to return. It almost sounded like some people were talking about, like, Jesus, like Trump's going to return. He's coming back and he's going to pay off all of our debts. This was literally told me. I'm like, what? And they believed it. They went all in on it.
I think that I do think that there have been people who have been very cultish when it comes to Trump. I don't think there's no denying that.
Oh, yeah. Well, sure.
And when I see people using various types of religious imagery around Trump on a cross, people putting on the back of their truck, Jesus was unfairly prosecuted and I still follow him. That kind of stuff, I think, does push people on Al's side of the fence to believe that everybody who supports Trump is in a cult. And I've called out even family members of mine that have posted some of that wacky religious imagery because, and this is one of the reasons why it was very difficult for me to get to a spot to support Trump, is that I remember the Bill Clinton years. I remember when the Republicans cried loudly and often that character matters.
Yeah.
And I would submit that from a moral perspective, in many ways, Clinton was probably a lot cleaner than Trump is. Just in the way that they live their personal lives.
Can I please? I've got to jump in and disagree with this.
Well,
I don't think
disagree,
Trump
that's fine.
To screw any intern.
But what I'm simply saying is that if character mattered then, character matters now. And I feel like
character definitely matters. Yes.
And I feel like that's where people on the left, and in fact, let me just kind of add one more story here. I got into a bit of a heated discussion with a fellow member of Culture Breakers when he made the definitive statement that no one can be a Christian and be a member of the Democratic Party. I took huge issue with that, and I will continue to take huge issue with that. If he would have phrased a little bit differently, I would have had no issue with it. Because another friend of mine, on a post that I made on Facebook, he said, I don't understand how someone can be a Christian and vote for Trump, and then listed out a lot of the issues that they have with regards to character and so on and so forth. Now, whether I agree with him or I disagree with him on that, approaching it from that perspective to ask the question, how can someone justify being a Christian and voting this way or voting that way, to me opens up a door for conversation, and I'm okay with that. I'm not okay with somebody definitively saying you can't be a Christian and vote this way or vote that way.
Yeah.
That doesn't jive with me.
Sure.
So anyhow, enough of that.
Gentlemen, we're about to hit the 2-hour mark. I imagine we ought to start winding her down. I think we ought to be open to doing this again. We look like the 5 if you brought us on Temu or something like that. Yeah, it's been a very good conversation. I've enjoyed it. Al, it's been great to talk with you there some. And I think we ought to do this again sometime. You guys got anything that you want to add before we close up shop?
LP.org.
Well, I just want to say that I really enjoy your podcast and the great interviews that you do with some of the people who've left the movement, especially the long, lengthy, informative ones have been great. Like I listened to them on the way to work, and I know that you have some great listeners out there who really benefit from hearing those stories coming out of the movement, and they're so helpful, and I know that. So good job doing that, and really great listing resources and things like that where people can who left and who do feel left out and marginalized know that like there's people like us out there who
Sure. Well, I appreciate it, Al. Thank you.
And can identify. So yeah, great job.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a big part of finding out that you're not alone. That's a big help coming out of stuff like we all came out of.